going to talk a little bit about trees today and give you a few tips that hopefully help. Now, I always use natural hair brushes for painting trees. So I've got a sable, a squirrel mop and a sable rigger. And I use varying sizes of those type brushes for trees. And it always seems to work for me. And first one I'm going to paint, I'll paint a summer tree, which I think out of all the seasons I find summer possibly the hardest. I'm not really sure why that is. I think probably they're so full of leaf that you don't see a lot of the bare bones. You don't see the branches and the trunks as much. You kind of have to do a little bit of work and find a pleasing shape. And so I'll start with the lightest tones first, just some raw sienna, cobalt blue and some cadmium yellow. And start at the top and a few kind of broken edges using the side of the brush. And now just varying the mix with the same colours, but just getting a little bit darker, and just drop that in wet in wet. And keep bringing the tree down, just thinking about the overall shape. Don't want it to be too symmetrical. And also taking care just to leave a couple of little sky holes at the top, but not too many. With it being a summer tree, there's so much foliage that you don't see too many branches or too much of the trunk. I mean, obviously it depends on the species of tree, so really just generalizing. But if you just remember, if it's a summer tree, not as many branches or not as much trunk showing, it should get you roughly in the ballpark. And so even more blue and raw sienna, and now just putting a few shadowy areas. I want to try and make the tree look round if possible. I don't want it to look too flat. And so already I'm thinking maybe it's an oak tree. And I want the light coming in from the left hand side, so at the base of the tree there maybe there's like a little bush and some grass. And again mix up the darker green and just add some of that on the right hand side for the shadows. And again maybe some little bushes and some grasses. And a little bit more cadmium yellow in the mix there, and just bring that across at the base just for a little bit of land, and allow the tree to run down into that as well. I'm just going to switch to the rigger. Just add some blue and a little bit of burnt sienna, and then mix that in with the green. So we've got quite a dark green now. And like I said, you don't really see as much of the trunk or the branches in summer, but we know they're there. So I'm just going to add some darker areas at the base of the tree. And like I said, I know the trunk's in there, so I still kind of put it in, but wet into wet, so it softens and melts back. But if you look at a tree in full foliage in the summer, you still know the trunk's in there, kind of casts its own shadow. And so just bring a few shadowy areas around all over. And now I'm just going to dry that. Okay, it's fully dry, so I'm just going to mix up just some dark paint with some burnt sienna and some ultramarine. And just add a few little hard edges here and there. And so just giving the paper a little bit of a mist. And just bringing some darks just at the base of the tree. So it's the areas where there's the most shadow. And just flick up a few little branches and grasses. Now without these dark areas, I suppose you could use the first wash of the tree to paint a distant tree. But now I'm just going to move up, and where I left those sky holes, I'm just going to put in just a couple of branches. Just so there's a few hard edges, just so it reads as a tree. I mean, I think it does without that anyway. Like I said, it could work as a distant tree without the hard edges. And I'll just scratch in to that dark paint. Now it's gone tacky. And little suggestion, maybe it's a little fence post, something like that. And I'll just go back into the larger brush, the sable brush, and just using the side of the brush again, just drag in a few slightly darker areas, and just so the sort of central area of the tree projects more towards our eye and hopefully gives the illusion that we're looking at a 3D object. As always, less is more, so do keep it simple. And I'll just grab the plastic card again and just scratch in just a couple of branches that are catching the light, so have one or two coming facing downwards and then maybe one or two facing upwards. And that's it, that's a summer tree, so very simple. Okay, going to move on to spring and autumn trees, and I'll paint them both at the same time, and that'll become apparent in a minute. And unlike summer trees, you'll be able to see more of the trunk, more of the branches. And so I've just ever so slightly dampened the paper just with a mist bottle. And I'll start at the base of the trees this time. So I've just got some brown paint, and it's just basically what's left in the palette, and I've added some burnt sienna into that. And I'm using the rigger brush. I think it's like a size 4 sable rigger. So it holds quite a lot of paint and quite a lot of water, so it's perfectly fine for this. So just bring the trunk of the tree up. And using quite quick strokes, getting like a dry brush effect, so the paint's breaking up on the paper surface. And just trying to find a shape of a tree that's not too symmetrical. And keeping it very simple, very kind of impressionistic, so I'm not going to paint in every branch and little twig. Bring a couple of branches facing slightly downwards as well. So very simple, basic tree shape. And just drop some dark in to the wet paint and allow that to run down, and just flick out a few grasses at the base there as well. And I'll just bring up another tree, pretty much the same thing. And so just trying to find a pleasing tree shape again. And so, like I said, the difference between spring and autumn trees is really basically just down to the colour of the foliage. And I wish I'd known this when I first started painting. I used to really kind of fuss over painting trees and try and paint every branch and every colour in the foliage and really get bogged down with so much detail because there's a huge amount going on and you kind of want to try and make the most of that. But essentially the only difference between spring and autumn trees, and it's a really nice way to look at it, is just the colour of the foliage. So with a spring tree you could go for a nice soft yellowy green just to suggest the new buds forming. And with an autumn tree, just think it's essentially the same shapes, but you'll just be using oranges and yellows and browns just to suggest maybe that there's dying leaves. And so just bring just a little bit of colour into the land. And just suggest a few shadowy areas as well. And like I said, same with the summer tree. You want to anchor your trees down into the land. I mean, if you don't add some dark areas and shadows at the base of the trees, they just look like they're floating. And so I've mixed up a green there. It's just with cadmium yellow and some blue. And so this would be the spring tree. Again, just still with the rigger brush. And I'm just using the brush on its side now. And make it slightly darker on the right hand side. So again, light's coming in from the left. And bring some of that across the trunk as well. It's still wet, so that's actually working quite nicely. It's softened and blended together. Okay, now for the autumn tree, just grab some burnt sienna or some raw sienna, a bit more cadmium yellow. And so it's quite a nice soft orange colour. And again, side of the brush, just bring some foliage across. And that's like an instant autumn tree there. And like I said, it's a very nice way to look at it. It simplifies it in your mind. So if you're looking at autumn trees or spring trees and you're not sure where to go with it, just basically think of them as the same thing. Okay, I think for a demonstration that's good enough. So that's spring and autumn trees. And now finally I'm just going to paint some winter trees, which for me is it's my favourite subject really. Something about painting in the winter. And now I'm just going to mix up some very dark green with some raw sienna and some blue. And now I'm thinking ivy covered tree. So I'm using the rigger again actually. And kind of dry brush again. Just allowing the edges to break up. And starting from the base again and then bringing some grass areas and little scrubby patches all at the same time. And now just mix some ultramarine, burnt sienna and a touch more cadmium yellow. So quite a dark green now. And now just drop that in while it's still wet. And so that kind of gives the impression that there's some ivy growing up the base of a tree. Now I've got some ultramarine, burnt sienna, it's almost black. And drop that in as well. And allow it all to mix. And just a few more grassy, scrubby areas. And now touch more ultramarine into that, and I'll just start to bring up a few branches. Just kind of broken wavy lines, similar to the spring trees, allowing the paint to break up on the surface. And just tease some branches out. I have a couple going facing downwards. And now again, just trying to find a pleasing shape. And like the other trees, don't want to do too many small branches. It's an impressionistic style anyway, so I don't want to over fuss it. And also, especially if you're looking at a tree from a little bit of a distance, you can't see the tiny small branches anyway. Maybe there's another little fence post there. A few little twigs and random scrubby areas. I think I'll add a few shadows across the ground. And so say there's some snow, so just bring over some blue shadows. Add a touch of alizarin into that as well. Just for a little bit of variation, and just bring that across the ground. Okay, now a mistake a lot of people make when painting winter trees would be just to leave it as it is, but if you look, if you really observe, you can always see some leftover little dead areas of leaf that haven't been blown off in the wind. So very simply, just again, side of the brush, kind of similar to the spring and autumn trees, but less of it. So just a suggestion that there's a little bit of stuff going on, and put some of that down into the land as well. And just strengthen up the darks at the base of the tree and allow some of that to run down as well into the land area. Okay, and I think that's basically it. So that's a winter tree. Well, okay, just to recap, there's the summer tree that we painted. It's very simple, but not as many branches or trunks showing, and just more concentrate on the shape of the tree and trying to get the shadows and the light right, and trying to make it look 3D. Top left there, you've got spring and autumn trees. So like I said, I like to think of them as essentially the same thing, but just different colours, different colour of foliage. So obviously spring trees, keeping it kind of on the yellow green side, and autumn more on the orange and brown. And then winter trees, a lot of the trunk and the branches showing. And it's, like I said, it's always a mistake not to add any foliage at all to a winter tree. So just a very simple suggestion of a little touch of foliage. Anyway, that's a video on trees, so I hope you like that. Let me know if you did, and I'll be back again next week with another video. So until then, happy painting, and I'll see you next week.